Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the second earliest, I think, stream that we've done on security and Crumpets. The first one was Ryan Dewhurst, who was in France. But welcome to the 17th episode of Security and Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security topics. Today, I'm delighted to have Arkadiy on the show. Arkadiy is a principal security architect at Chime. Previously, he served as the security application head of application security and infrastructure security there. He has worked in software security and engineering positions at Lob, Airbnb, Twitter, CardSpring, which was acquired by Twitter. Arkadiy has released various open source solutions useful for cloud security, defensive application controls, and also bug bounty hunting. Welcome, Arkadiy. Welcome to the stream.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, on my last stream, we had Marissa Fagan on the show, and she gave a delightful introduction into like what would she recommend, while she like if someone was to come to San Francisco. Considering that you also reside in San Francisco, what would be if someone was to come to the city? What would you recommend someone to do?
There's so many good hiking spots in the Bay. If you're coming from outside, I would recommend maybe like Alamere Falls or some of these other great hiking spots around the Bay. As someone who has lived here for a while, that is not like I don't need to go out to the same hiking spots. I'll just go to like the Panhandle, or I'll go to my favorite, diner. The Grand Cafe in Lower Haight is my favorite diner. So stuff like that.
Awesome, yeah, Lower Hay and Hay Ashbury in general is a great place to be. Magnolia Brewing is fantastic, and Black Sands, etc. So, and
Just went
Tornadoes,
there.
yeah, great place, good food. Awesome. So, pleasantries out the way. Let's dive straight into it. So, you've worked at some pretty notable places. Could you talk about your career in general, like your background, and how things started for you, how you moved into your current role, or how things evolved for you moving into a security engineering position?
Sure. So I actually, straight out of college, I knew I wanted to work in security. I, for many years, was very passionate about it. Well, I still am passionate about it. But it was very hard to get time of day from anyone. You need security experience to get a job at a company, but how are you supposed to get security experience if you don't already have security experience? Real chicken and egg problem that I think is the same with most niche fields. So I was just doing regular backend software engineering at a company called CardSpring that you mentioned, and we got acquired by Twitter, where I was still continuing to do backend software engineering. There was an opportunity internally to branch onto the security team. They were willing to take a chance on me and train me up. And after I had Twitter security on my resume, people were very happy to talk to me. So I continued working um, as an application security engineer there at Airbnb. Um, I, for many years, had aspirations of like someday I'll be CISO. I want to, whatever, which is a management position, obviously. So I wanted to get experience being a people manager. I joined a startup called Lob as the first security hire. They were like a B2B company, about 50 employees when I joined. And I thought, okay, I can own the entire security program here, learn more than just application security. I'll learn like cloud security and corporate security and incident response and governance, risk, and compliance. I got us our SOC 2. It was a lot of breadth, um, which was fantastic. And after that, I did end up joining Chime, and at the peak of my management, I had a team of 9 people. Um, and then I decided that, maybe people management wasn't for me after a year and a half. It was actually quite stressful and difficult. So I transitioned back to an individual contributor role, and that's what I'm doing now, working as a security architect.
Awesome. That's interesting that when you worked at Lob, I think we were on the same floor at some point because when I was at Synopsys, it was also on the Berry Street office. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that we didn't actually cross paths then because I was always on that floor. So
Yeah, I hope no Lyft people are listening, but the Lyft people in that building were always like clogging up the elevators. It
they
was a
were.
real pain. Yeah.
Both of them, like both sides, it was ridiculous. Like, I mean, they did have some pretty decent like events at that space, and it was like very spacious, very nice. But there was definitely a lot of them, and I could always like sometimes have to wait like at least like 10 minutes to be able to get up the stairs because I didn't have the badge that allowed you to go up the stairs. I only had the badge that allowed me to get into the lift. Oh, and that's a funny one funny story that's not related to this at all. So I'm from obviously from England, and I call it the lift. So someone was like, "How do I get to the lift building?" So I was like, "Yeah, you take that lift, you go downstairs, you go through that corridor, you go through to the other building, then you take that lift and go up the top to the fifth floor or something." And they were like, "I was like, okay, take the escalator, go down, or the elevator, sorry, and go down the stairs." But yeah, so obviously it's a bit of a language barrier to begin with when I first was in that building. Um,
Right.
yeah, so let's keep on your your management track. So obviously you decided to transition back. I saw on your LinkedIn you put a little smiley face saying like now back in an IC role, which means that you're fairly happy. But let's what are some of the like your favorite accomplishments from when you were a manager? Let's say.
Uh, Building the team. I mean, that's my number one job as a manager is like recruiting and recruiting for security. I mean, recruiting in this market in general, I think is hard, but security feels even harder, especially for application security was a real struggle. I think cloud security, it's like the same skill set as like a DevOps or a Sec DevOps type of person, and there's a lot of those people available. So cloud security recruiting was a little bit easier, but application security was such a slog. Um, so building out the team, helping set direction, helping the provide feedback on people's projects, on their performance, things that I think they could be better at, things that I think they were doing fantastic at. Um, all of those, normal managerial things that I, later discovered that I was not so great at.
I mean, that's an interesting, path because you said you wanted to be a CISO at the beginning, and it's interesting like how, you know, I in my head I've always been saying to myself that I just want to be like very technical, I just want to keep going down that path, but I actually have a lot of skills that probably would be quite useful in management. So I obviously sometimes struggle with that myself. But obviously, what are the general, expectations from a generic career path that you've seen from normally you start out as an IC and then you kind of like hit a peak where you can't really go further because getting to like distinguished engineer or something like that kind of takes a long time, so people generally go to like a management route. Do you think that's generally because of what the expected kind of status is it because of money, is it because of different factors, like what do you generally think that is? And because obviously for yourself you weren't too you know
Yeah, I mean, there's many different factors. Certainly, the ones that you listed, I think there is this habit within engineering companies. There's like a high performing IC, and the team ends up needing a manager, and both sides are like, well, let's try this out. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. It is a completely different skill set. So, people who are strong technical ICs doesn't necessarily translate into being a good people manager, but sometimes they'll excel at it. Um, Money and status, certainly. I mean, like, money is not everything, but Barry is not cheap either. Like, it certainly helps. And like the cachet of being a leader, I think um, is a good incentive for some people. And yeah, there's many different reasons. I think being a CISO, I really thought it would be like the pinnacle, like the peak, like ultimate, like security position I could get to. But um, I report to our CISO now and I see what his job is like. And it's like not anything that is fun or things that I would want to do. He has to deal with a lot of like representing the company to the board and dealing with a lot of just annoying like org building and structuring and like advocating, fighting for headcount and dealing with HR, like a lot of things that just don't seem fun at all to me. And all of the fun work, the actual work that I really enjoy, he mostly delegates down to his team, which is what a good leader should do is delegate to their team. But um, if I was in that position, I would have a hard time delegating certain things. So
Yeah, I think that you kind of just put the nail on the head, especially when people start to like transition into more senior positions, they kind of find it hard to give up things, especially like, the engineering work. And, I've been seeing people that are in like now obviously quite senior positions where, the board is like, if we see you committing code again, we're going to be really annoyed kind of thing. So it's definitely an interesting like problem to have. Sometimes it works out for people. I generally like I'm quite an introverted person. So talking to people every single day kind of like wears me down. So, in reality, I think the combination of IC versus management is a very interesting path. So you've obviously spent some time as a manager, but obviously you've also done a lot of work as IC. So and obviously there's great reward for both. But some of the stuff from a security engineering position is basically partnering with engineering teams. And obviously you've had a lot of experience with that. Sometimes it can feel like a roadblock to most organizations, especially teams that kind of have a lot of friction in between the engineering and security kind of side of things. What are the common issues that you generally see from security teams when they're trying to have a partnership with engineering teams, and it just kind of seems to be failing?
I think the most common failure mode that I see is security engineers who maybe don't have software development backgrounds. So they'll ask for certain things without understanding the cost of the thing that they're asking for, or that it's not really feasible, or not being reasonable about timelines. I think sometimes people will come to security with a question and saying, "Can I do this, or is this thing safe?" And certain security team members, I've seen people respond kind of rudely, like say no, and they're a little bit rude about it, or they'll like get mad at you for even asking the question, like, "How could you think about making a public S3 bucket? Like, how dare you?" Um, Other anti patterns I see, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I just think that software engineers turn security engineers turn out better. I think it's easier for a software engineer to learn security than it is for a security engineer to learn software engineering. And once you have that software development background, you're more empathetic with developers. You're more reasonable with your asks. You can actually get your hands dirty sometimes and help fix things if you need to. If the other team is like too swamped and maybe it's important enough, maybe you can chip in somehow. And then you get a better understanding of the system, and you build like camaraderie with that team, and they're more willing to work with you in the future. You're like building social capital with them. So yeah, those are some of the things that we like to practice in our organization, like actually doing engineering work ourselves, not just throwing stuff over the fence and saying, "Hey, here's a problem, now you go fix it and like tell me when it's done."
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of success when it comes to these types of things. Like I had the similar pains. Like I actually don't really come from a traditional you know software engineering background. I did ethical hacking at college, or say in the UK university, and then ultimately went into a consulting role which didn't really require coding for a long time, and I kind of like felt that pain like when I first started to like move and start talking to engineers and trying to like even deliver trainings and stuff as engineers. Because if you don't understand like what the pains that they're already having, it's really hard to like be able to sympathize with them, to be able to like gain that good relationship. And without the relationship, people are going to say no. It's like generally, like if you're trying to push in like a new security feature, or if you're trying to get people to adopt a certain security culture, you need to have a good relationship with that team, and that either is like through like champions programs or through just having a good relationship. Like I think some of my successful things have been like either using a product, finding some of the woes itself, or you know writing some of the components and realizing like how difficult it actually is. So I think it's a really good thing to mention. um
Absolutely. And I'll just say briefly about champions also. Like, we have a champions program, I'll put in air quotes. It's very light. We don't have like meetings. None of the champions have assigned responsibilities. It's just a Slack channel, and we just share like interesting industry news. Like some company gets hacked, and we'll put a link about it and have a little discussion, and like that's all that we do. So it's not even. It doesn't have to be something heavy. Like, we just want to raise security culture and visibility.
it's important, and obviously we're going to get into um you know some of the features that some of the services you've been building at Chime, or your team has been building at Chime. So I'm going to talk some more things about just the engineering, like, side of things right now. So, let's say you are a security engineer, and you kind of feeling that friction, between development and security. Like, what are some of the things how someone from security engineering potentially get more involved in the development side of things? Either through partnership or through actually like trying to like merge the gap in a way, rather than having like that solidified gap where someone's shouting at each other from across the email chain or Slack thread.
Uh, I mean, once you're talking about a specific issue and you're not able to get traction on it, then I would maybe I would approach it differently than like overarching, like how can we improve the culture of the organization, which is like takes a lot of time and takes a lot of invested effort. But if you're maybe one thing, security teams, I've seen some security teams do this rotation program where engineers from other teams go and join the security team for a quarter. And I've also seen it the reverse way, where a security team becomes embedded within a team for a quarter. That can be interesting and help raise awareness from like both sides. Champions program always sharing like news and articles and trying to like tie it back to your company, like, oh, here's how, not to call out any company, but like a Square had a breach recently with their investing product, and we're like, oh, here's how we think this happened. Here's the defenses that we have at Chime. Here's where we could improve, whatever stuff like that. Um, what else? Just being available, just being like a nice, kind human being. Like it sounds really basic, but again, I do think that a lot of security people could improve on their communication and empathy sometimes. Um, and what else? There was something that just came to mind. Um, One thing I see sometimes, another anti-pattern that I try to avoid is when you do get asked a question, you're always going to choose the most strict, safest, secure answer of like, oh, I don't know, contrived example, but like, what size key should I use? Like, use a 4096-bit RSA key, whatever. But it's like if you zoom out of the situation a little bit and like actually the impact here would be nothing if you chose the less secure option. Like, try to meet people halfway, try to actually compromise with them, and like when you don't need the strictest level of security for a given situation, like don't ask for it. Like you can actually tell people, you know what, we can reduce this and reduce friction for employees or for users or whatever. We don't need to be this level of paranoid in this situation.
Got it. Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I have one final question before we move into some more of the engineering side. Is that I know that you help with onboarding efforts and at Chime. So like what are some of the successful ways that you've instilled security from the ground up when someone first comes in? Obviously you had a team that you kind of started with the ground up. I believe it was Lob or Chime, but yeah, I think it was Lob. And then how have you generally been successful in like onboarding from that side, and also just general good practices that you would recommend?
So sorry, onboarding employees or onboarding the security team?
Both, like yeah. So like, because obviously you need to. It's obviously security is say everyone's job because it's technically is, and onboarding is one good component to that. And I know you've had some success there, and obviously again still like just from both sides.
So, onboarding employees, I currently teach the security engineering onboarding. We have two security onboarding classes, one that's like a general for all employees that's run by compliance, and one that is for engineers only, and that one is run by me. And I just really like to make things very real world for people. I think sometimes what security engineers, again, will like talk about. Um, I don't even there's some very good security engineers out there, but anyway, the things that I like to talk about are real world examples of hacks. I throw in like pop quizzes. I make it interactive. I'm like, how did Target get hacked? How did like Uber get hacked? And I'll have like multiple choice of here are some of the different situations and have people guess. I like to share actual real world of like, oh, Snap and Uber and Yahoo engineers are like accessing customer data, which makes people like upset, understandably. Like nobody wants some engineer at one of these companies looking through their data. Well, I'm like, great, we shouldn't do that to our engineers, or sorry, our customers either. We need to have like safeguards in place to make sure that like we're doing the right things and protecting our customer data. I talk about real examples of vulnerabilities that Chime has. I share like actual vulnerabilities that we got from our bug bounty program or internal reports or pen tests or whatever, and I'll like walk through the vulnerabilities. I just, yeah, try and always tie it back to real world stuff. And I think people can sense the passion sometimes and they also get interested. I get really positive feedback about it. I don't think I'm allowed to share the slides, but if I could, I would. I love. I should just publish a blog post. I think
Chad?
on how I think security engineering onboarding should work. Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've seen similar success. I've seen some organizations where they'll basically like, hey, like if you want to go and like read like something that really catastrophic happened to us like 5 years ago, go to this document kind of thing, and actually read it, and then they like put into their onboarding about like, hey, like here's how all the things that we could have done better. Those types of things. I'm sure Log4Shell is going to probably be in people's onboardings at some point, right? Like those types of things. Like if you can show like how it impacted the company massively, it's going to be very beneficial to get people to be aware of security issues, and like how to be more privacy centric. If we suddenly like somehow released accidentally like sent back everyone's like sensitive data by mistake from like a database query or something. So
Yeah, absolutely. And also just like giving people real world advice, like again, I think compromising and not being so security like absolutist, is that the word? Um, where some of the other trainings that I see, they'll do things like, oh, like never click a link, which is like, how are you supposed to do your work if you can't click a link? Or like if you tell me like don't click phishing links, don't click suspicious links. I'm like, what's a suspicious link? Can you tell me how? Because I don't know what a suspicious link is. Like browsers are built to click links. That's how we do our work. Um, so stuff like that as well. I think when you give advice like that, where it's so disconnected from people's day to day, they're like, well, I can just ignore the rest of the advice because it's like doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So moving on to some of the work that's been happening over at Chime, I'm just going to remove my face from the stream. It's no longer there. I'm now sharing the wonderful blog post that your colleague, is it David?
David?
David, sorry, released a blog post, and it talks about how Chime, not crime, definitely not crime, how Chime creates a proactive security culture, and I think it's really interesting. Could you just give a quick summary into what Monocle is and what it tries to address?
Sure. So this project that David wrote, it crawls our GitHub and checks security score factors for every one of our GitHub repos. Like, does it have our secret scanning enabled? Does it have any open vulnerability tickets? Does it have any GitHub vulnerability alerts from like, third-party packages?
Hmm.
All these other factors it checks for, and then it'll bundle that up into a letter grade. And you can see everyone, like our so and so repo has like an F grade or so and so repo has an A plus grade and everything in between. And then it'll blast out those scores to the team channel. So if you work on some XYZ repo, it'll every now and then into your channel will say like, hey, your score increased or decreased, or here's your score, and you can take these steps to increase your security score. You can like add security scanning to your repo or something. That's at a high level what it does. And also it has badges. Everyone loves putting GitHub badges in their READMEs, so people
They really do.
they can have their letter grade prominently displayed.
Yeah, so that's I actually love that because this was gonna be a part of the conversation later, but I feel like when you add things like security badges and visibility, it kind of feels like a lot like gamification in many ways because people want to see that scorecard increase, right? And do you kind of like see that as like a positive win? Do you see it as kind of gamification in a way?
Yeah, and I think it has been hugely successful for the company. I regularly see conversations in Slack people will just bring up without us saying or doing anything. They'll be like, "Oh, hey, I saw this vulnerability in our repo," or "I saw like, can we turn on this thing to improve our letter grade?" or whatever it is. People really get into it, which is fantastic, right? You want like that's the only way to scale. We can't have the security team going out and bugging teams. There's too many teams, there's too many like issues. So it's a fantastic way to scale. I think it's been a great project.
Awesome. And so I have another question on that. Like, obviously, you have security dips that these things happen, and let's say you add like a new security feature that then ends up coming into Monocle. How do you get that kind of across the organization? Because I could see that being potentially disruptive in a way because suddenly like people think they have an A+ score and then you add a new feature and then the security dips down and then they have to go and do something different. So like what are the types of like tips and tricks you might recommend at an organization that are trying to do this, where they're like, hey, we're going to add a new feature, how do we put this across the org, and people shouldn't be worried if their score dips from like a plus to a minus or like a C or whatever.
So I mean, that also can happen even without us adding a new feature. If some A plus repo, if the vulnerability comes out in one of their
Hmm.
third party dependencies, it'll drop their score. So I think hopefully they might already be used to it. I actually can't think of an example where that has happened to us, where we added a new feature, but I hope people would be open to it. We also don't, I mean, we report the scores upwards to leadership, but there's no bad things that happen just yet. I think we're thinking about we just got all production services up to a B or higher, which was our goal, and I think pretty soon we're gonna enable. We run in AWS and Kubernetes. I think we're writing a admission controller that will prevent deploys if the deploy is coming from a production repo that has a score less than a B. So pretty soon it'll actually be required
Oh,
to
wow.
maintain a high enough score just to deploy to production. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty important too because then you can't really integrate things which are gonna like really like can't be like too strict as well because obviously like images and sorry vulnerabilities in images make sense because that's kind of probably like centralized. You have gem security, which obviously is important too. Some of those things need exceptions because it's either in like a transient dependency or something which has issues. So my next question is, how does your team like choose where to prioritize investments in security? Like, you've added Brakeman for your SaaS, you've added, Docker images stuff, and Circle CI is enabled, etc. Like, where does your team generally try to invest, and like, what do you look for in adding into this type of service?
Uh, so for the company as a whole, I mean, we're just going through half planning right now, and we just get it together in these big rooms and brainstorm together, well, virtually big rooms, and like put up a stickies board, and everyone just starts throwing up ideas of like, oh, I think we should fix this. I think like we could take on this project. Um, and we have results from like previous vulnerability reports that we've received, or like I think we have a sort of a good sense of like what the weak parts of the business are, not weak, but like what could use improvement versus what has actually made a lot of improvement already is quite strong. So I think we can already have an okay sense of like where we should improve on. And then for product security specifically, I mean, some of the things that I'm thinking about for the next half, we've done such a good job with like AWS. I think we could start focusing on like GCP a little bit. We have a little bit of a GCP footprint. um, for application security. I don't know. We're still going through this planning process. I
Got
don't
it.
think that was maybe actually the full question. I think were you talking about planning for Monocle?
Yeah, I mean, like like Monocle in general, but also I think kind of important to like think about how do you plan, like how do you like prioritize things, those types of things is quite interesting. But Monocle in general, but also you know planning, etc., is probably quite important for people to like realize, like, or think about when an engineering team seems to be doing quite a good job from at least from the outsider's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, for Monocle planning, I'm not involved with that at all. It's this, it's like David, and he is working on the sister team, the security engineering team.
Hmm.
But mainly, if I ever see something like GitHub enables a new feature that we can turn on for a repo, or there's a new thing that we want to check for, then I'll just like throw it into the channel for that application. I'll be like, oh, hey, can we detect this? That's the the most of my involvement.
Awesome, got it. Cool. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears, and I'm gonna hide my face again. Um, over here. So like you've been obviously you have a pretty active GitHub page. I'm now showing my face is gone again. We're now seeing your GitHub application. So or application your GitHub profile. You've contributed to a lot to open source like GitHub. On GitHub like bug bounty targets, AWS public IPs, trying to prevent server-side request forgery. Could you talk about some of your open source projects, how they're generally used by you, or like how you've seen them used, like in the wild?
Sure. So probably my most popular project is the bounty targets data that you mentioned, and that's just crawling HackerOne and BugCrowd and a few other like bounty programs and fetching all of the public scopes and making them available as a JSON file.
Hmm.
I remember when I wrote this a few years ago, it seems like everyone is trying to automate bug bounty reports and like make as much money as possible. And there
Still
was
the
no
case.
good and there's no good source of data. I'm like, how are people manually like following these scopes? What are they doing? It's crazy to me. Some of the bug bounty programs actually do provide an API, but some of them I'm like literally parsing HTML to get
Yeah.
um, these scopes. So I'm like, this is so painful. So I know if I add this, other people will use it, and it ended up being my most successful project. So I'm super happy about that. Um, some of the other ones, I mean, AWS public IPs. I don't actually use this quite as much anymore. I back in the day I wrote it because I just wanted to understand like what is everything public that we're exposing in our AWS account. That was a hard question for me to answer at the time, but I think that Scott Piper's Cloud Mapper is a much better tool to do that. So if anyone is thinking about using AWS public IPs, you should use Scott Piper's Cloud Mapper. Um, and the rest of these, I mean, uh, the SSRF filter one you mentioned also. So uh, server-side request forgery, very severe bug, often leads to remote code execution. People kept getting hit by it, and it's actually quite hard to solve correctly. There's a lot of subtleties around DNS time of check to time of use or
Hmm.
following like redirects or different like schemes or things like that. So I thought, you know what, I can fix this. And so that's what I wrote that for. And it was quite tricky. You had to like actually patch OpenSSL, like Ruby's bindings to OpenSSL to be able to like fully solve for this.
Oh
But
wow.
I don't think that project ever got too popular. I think most people aren't aware of it, or maybe aren't even aware of the vulnerability.
Well, hopefully at least one person will at least see this and see it and maybe check it out to see how things you were doing. Maybe if they can reproduce some of the stuff, internally, even if it's just extracting some of the code and reusing it internally, etc. Those types of things I think are really important. So I just want to also go ahead.
I was just going to say one more project that I wanted to mention that is not that security relevant, but ended up also being extremely popular. Um, Zoom, when the pandemic started and everyone switched to Zoom and they got like 10x as many users, whenever you joined a Zoom meeting, it would try to get you to download the Zoom application. And if you clicked cancel and like waited a few seconds, eventually it would, in small text, it would show like click to join from your browser. But they really hid the link. It was very hard to join from your browser. And I didn't want to download the Zoom desktop application, just like I didn't want to download the Discord
Yep.
desktop application. So I wrote a small browser extension that when you landed on a Zoom invite link, it just transparently redirected you to the web client. And that ended up
Nice.
getting like 50,000 installs. It was like a 15 lines of code, and it was also incredibly popular.
I love reading the note on this, where like Zoom has issued a trademark violation against this extension, which I think is, yeah. Could you tell the
Yeah.
story about that? Like that would be quite interesting to hear.
Yeah, so this just recently, I think in like March, so a month or two ago, the extension was taken down from the Chrome Web Store because Zoom issued a trademark violation. I tried to fight it, but I can't. I'm not like a lawyer, and Google is like I can't even talk to a human, so there was no real way for me to fight it. So I just ended up re-uploading the extension with instead of Zoom ZOOM, it's XOOM,
Oh, gotcha.
and unfortunately, I also lost all of my download stats, which I'm quite bummed about. But it's not a huge deal. Interestingly, they only issued the trademark violation against Google and not, I have it on the Firefox and Edge and Opera web stores as well, and all of those still remain up with the original Z spelling. I think it was an automated takedown request. I don't think any human even looked at it. They were just like, "Oh, I see something called Zoom on the internet. Let me send a trademark violation."
Gotcha. Okay. Well, just in case, I'll remove this from the YouTube video, so no one knows to get rid of it. uh,
Um,
or maybe I'll just keep it in because it's good. Okay. So I would love to like that's like a really interesting thing. So obviously you're quite proud. You don't want to install things on your machine. Totally get that. For me, I'm a little bit more relaxed in that sense, but um, obviously not going to install generic like random binaries. But I have a friend Parsia who's been on SecuriTEA and Crumpets in the past, and he basically like finds all of these vulnerabilities with like desktop applications all the time, like finding various vulnerabilities, or like they're running like mini web servers which can get hacked, or there's like no origin checks and those types of things. So anything on the internet can talk to your machine, or there's an issue with the parsing scheme, those types of things. And so I understand your like, not wanting to install those things on your machine.
Yeah, I think all of those issues are very valid and I guess are also concerning for me. But my real concern is mainly like when you install the desktop app, like I have no idea what they're hoovering up off of my system and like what data they're sending. They have so much more access to like read what processes I'm running or other stuff like that. Like
That's very
in a
true.
web browser, you've got a nice little sandbox. So that's the main reason. But I completely agree with you. All those things are valid vulnerabilities that have happened, and I should be worried about those too.
You're more privacy centric. I'm just more like I don't want to get hacked. So it's yeah. Okay. So cool. So like obviously you've automated a bunch of things. I love the you didn't want to do this thing, so you just created an extension which basically just allows you to redirect. Because I've seen that in the past. It's like try and download Zoom, cancel, go to web browser. It's very annoying, very tedious. So automating the small things sometimes is really important. But like, what is your approach to automating a problem? I think we kind of like learnt about it, but like obviously bug bounty targets. I don't want to do this, or I don't want to have to wait 10 seconds to be able to go to a web browser. But like, what is your general thought process and your general methodology to automating a problem?
Have you ever seen that XKCD that's like it's a table, and on the one end is like the amount of time it takes you to do a task, and on the other end is how long it'll take you to automate it, and like whether or not it's worth it. to it's a great XKCD. It's really funny. But I think that's part of it, and then part of it also is just like how much fun is it going to be for me to build the automation? Sometimes even if it's not worthwhile in terms of like time payoff to build this automation, I might do it just because I think I'll learn something new or because I want to break from whatever I'm working on, and I'm like, you know what, this will be like a quick little win I can do. So
Gotcha. Okay. And like obviously, like you know, you've had quite a few, you know, lots of downloads. Obviously, you lost your stats, unfortunately, from Google. But you know, what are some tips you might give to someone who might want to go? Like, I really want to start like trying to build some open source projects. You know, what would be like, you know, a recommendation for you to say like, hey, you know, go and do these types of things, and then eventually you'll be able to get to where you need to be able to like, you know, build bug bounty targets or server-side request forgery protection type of stuff. Or
I mean, I think it's the same feedback I would tell sometimes when people are trying to also become like, I hate this word, but like internet influencer or anything else like that, trying to like start this video podcast situation and get more viewership, or start like tweeting and get more followers, or
I
start
feel
a blog and
attacked.
get Well, I just think some people get so like, like it needs to be perfect. I need to buy like the best microphone, and I need like the filter and the headset, and I need to like everything needs to be perfect. I need the whatever. And it's like, just start making content. The content is the most important thing, and eventually you'll hone your practice over time and fix the little things that come up, and like don't worry about that stuff. And so same thing for open source. Don't worry about like, I need like the best perfect project. I'm going to like, the code is going to be so clean, and then I'm going to, once it's ready, then I'll release it. Just like start committing, make it public from day one. It doesn't matter if it's trash code. Just like start doing something, and eventually you're going to do something that sticks. Like that's the most important thing, is keep doing it or start doing it, not that your like code is perfect or whatever.
I actually love that. So I have some fun stories. So when I started to try and do security in Crumpets, the first few episodes, absolutely awful. And it wasn't because of it was nothing to do with the guests. The guests were great. But like, you know, you have issues with, you know, bandwidth where, you know, Brian Dewhurst's one, he was in the middle of nowhere in France, and his internet was terrible, and he kept like cutting out, and we were trying to use Discord, and I wasn't paying for like the premium Discord, so it was just even worse, and it was just, you know, confounded. And then, you know, on another one, when I interviewed Mario Heidrich, I accidentally had the same microphone embedded twice, so there was like a large echo for the first like 30 minutes. And like, you know, he's an amazing person, very technical, like had some amazing things to say, and listening to him just brought me so much joy in general, because he's a, you know, like, you know, it's kind of like Sammy is my hero type situation for me. And you know, it was just very sad to like see that those echoes and stuff. So yeah, I think you're very right. The same with like, you know, encoding in general. You know, everything that comes to like trying to like just start working on content, you just have to kind of have, you know, repetition, I think, in many ways, and it doesn't matter if it's bad. I did some very hacky code yesterday that I'm not proud of, but I had to get something done, and it works, and eventually I can iterate on that, make it better, and you know, only can improve from there. So really resonate with what you're saying,
The
Cherry.
stream quality looks excellent today, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I've worked to, you know, I've figured out, you know, again, like we're using Google Meet. The first time I used it was with Travis McPeak, and I was alt tabbing, and the entire thing was just going boop 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 every time, every like few seconds, because I just didn't know like the quirks. So now I haven't alt tabbed once. Hopefully it's great. Let's move on to from open source contributions into cloud security. So, you know, you've spent a long time in the cloud world. I'm still a massive cloud novice, to be honest, but I obviously wanted to get your perspective on a few things. You know, I've just recently joined a startup, and you know, like, what if you found yourself as being like the first cloud security person in an organization? You know, I'm
By
not.
the
So,
way,
oh, go ahead.
I'm I was just going to say, by the way, I'm so envious you get to work with Clint. What a
Yep,
fantastic job that you've joined.
yep.
Um, First things to focus on, first cloud hire. This is actually was one of my like interview questions for a while for cloud security engineers. Is like, you are given the keys to the kingdom in a brand new greenfield environment. Like, what do you look for? How do you start that problem? Um, Always inventory is the first thing. You have to like know what's in your environment before you can figure out like what you're going to secure. And most people don't have weird like whatever SageMaker or other AWS services. Most of the time it's like EC2, IAM, S3, and like networking. like VPCs and security groups, like those four things I would focus on. And once you have a good handle of like what's in your environment and how it's being used, you can probably find some low hanging fruit. Maybe public has three buckets, maybe like IAM users that aren't used and can just be deleted, making sure that employees are logging in through like federated, SSO instead of having permanent credentials and like people haven't been offboarded. Um, Making sure you don't have like EC2 instances or load balancers public to the internet, just like starting to lock down your environment. And over time, as you learn, like the workloads run by your engineering team or the deployment workflows or the other things, then you can like make better improvements around targeted things that you'll see that like won't break people that just I don't have a good example, but start with those quick easy ones and move on from there. Service control policies super impactful. We have a bunch of service control policies in our account just to like you can't perform any actions as the root user. Those are all denied. Like you can't create public ECR or um, repositories. You can't create public S3 buckets. That's not a SCP. There's a account level S3 public access block setting that we have enabled for that. There's all sorts of like account and organization level things that you can set up, and those are fantastic. If you can turn those on without breaking people or fix the things that are broken and then turn those on, then you don't have to worry about that problem ever again. You just know it's fully solved for your entire organization. So those are my favorite ones.
Yeah, I love when like obviously I normally think about it at the application like kind of side of things, but if the framework itself has the ability to disable those things by default, that's great. And obviously, if you can do that from a cloud administrative perspective, I think that's also really powerful. Um, so I think just like application security, I'm sure cloud security is very similar. Obviously we say like look at the OWASP top 10, make sure you have your authorization checks good, use encryption, use TLS, those types of things. I think probably you did just comment on a lot of those things, but like what would be like the core fundamentals that, organizations really should be focusing on in like today?
Identity and access management for sure. Just like follow least privilege. Again, super basic. Everyone knows to practice least privilege, but then it doesn't actually happen. People either set up policies incorrectly because they're not sure how to do it correctly, or sometimes it takes more work to figure out what the minimal policy is. But that doesn't mean you should give like star star or S3 star or whatever. Like we've seen people do that. It's like no, you can't do that. So yeah, identity and access management and like networking, probably those are the core bread and butter. And then also, I was going to say something. I lost my train of thought. What was the thing? What did you just say?
OWASP top 10, authorization, encryption,
Oh,
TLS.
encryption. Thank you.
Hmm.
So I have sometimes people are so opinionated or so like every resource needs to be encrypted. Like S3 needs to be encrypted at rest. SQS, SNS, they all need to be encrypted at rest. And like, okay, that's true. I guess it's very easy to turn on encryption at rest inside Amazon. It's like managed for you and transparent to you. But also, what is it preventing? What is it? It's just like if someone physically breaks into Amazon's data center and they pop out a hard drive and they run away with it because we have encryption at rest enabled, they're not going to be able to read the contents of that hard drive. Like we should still do it, and it's a nice compliance checkbox. But I think sometimes if a company's going to get hacked, it's not going to get hacked because someone is breaking into Amazon's data center. It's because of something they did to themselves, like a logic vulnerability or
Yeah,
whatever.
I think like most of the time someone's going to read that contents not off the hard drive, but once it's been delivered somewhere else versus directly on the hard drive itself. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I kind of like wanted to ask a more controversial question. Like, what are some of the things that you think people aren't really looking at when it comes to from both an attacker's and defender's perspective when it comes to like cloud security, or is it just everyone kind of like says the same mantra or
I do think it is mostly people saying the same mantra. Let me see if I can come up with a controversial opinion on the spot. Things that people are not looking for from both an attacker and defender perspective. I mean, everyone is looking at like identity and access management and like network access. Those are very um, common things. It's hard to say what people are not looking for. I
it's
would have to think about it.
no, it's more than fine. Maybe I can add like if you suddenly think of something, I can add it to like the YouTube. kind of notes at the end.
Do you have a good answer for that? What do you think people are not looking at?
Literally no idea because I'm again a cloud novice. I just thought like it would be an interesting thing to because there's people like in our industry like James Kettle or people from like Portswigger or people that are doing or some of the GitHub security research team like that are finding like all these like really interesting things that people generally aren't looking at. And yeah, I just obviously like they're finding like new things all the time. And the same for when Mario was on the stream, like he Cure 53 and his organization, they released Dom Purify, and basically he like basically released like a he basically said like no one's looking at the Node.js DOM parser with DOM Purify. There's definitely going to be a bunch of bugs kind of thing. Like so that just in general, yeah, like someone with that expertise. And I don't think
I,
anyone's still done that research. I sometimes like look to see if anyone's like published anything. Maybe I should do that research myself, but yeah.
you should. I mean, I look up to those people a lot. I think they're technically like savants. They're so good at what they do, and I love seeing these new techniques and capabilities. But also, I think that most companies are not going to be hit with some sort of like new technique. Like sometimes, yes, sometimes you're targeted, but most of the time it's like, oh, you had like a public S3 bucket, you had a secret in source code, and then you're like your GitHub repo like was public, or someone got access to your CI system or something. This like most companies are breached through these very like common low hanging fruit vectors. And it honestly, like, I don't know, I feel like security engineers were doing the same thing at every company, just switching companies and then starting from scratch, like, okay, let's solve all these low hanging fruit again.
Yeah, the secrets are a little bit different in every organization. You've got like, the different types of XSS vectors are going to be a little bit different depending on the framework or whatever. But yeah, it's always, at least from what I've seen, like the general problems are always the same. Sometimes worse, sometimes better kind of thing, depending on, what they're using, how they're leveraging things. So I do agree with that. Like in general, like it's generally like a lot of compromises and breaches will like lead to, due to like, just best practices hygiene type stuff, which is really hard to do. Like people say like just do security hygiene. It's a very difficult subject, and to allow and enable developers to push code very quickly, sometimes these things slip. And there's always going to be those evolving processes that need to happen. So
That's exactly correct, I think. I mean, most of the problems that I face, or probably most security engineers face in any organization, they're not like the technical challenges of like, how do I prevent cross-site scripting or how do I prevent SQL injection? Like, those are solved problems. The difficulty is like working with engineering, making sure that we're like detecting things, making sure we can get things on their roadmap and get them to pick up our work, and like working with them, working through organizational or political issues, like um, communicating to them effectively. That sort of stuff is like all problems are human problems. I'll put it that way.
gotcha. Arkadiy, thank you so much for today. We're going to end it there just to give you time so you can jump into work. Really appreciate the time. This has been a great conversation. And, make sure you check out the blog post. It was posted in the Twitch chat. It'll be on the YouTube as well. Check out, Arkadiy's open source contributions. That'll also be on the links, and, follow him on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. But honestly, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Right. That was episode 17 of Security and Crumpets. See you next time.